guys, thanks for checking out Super Little Challenges. This is a show dedicated to overcoming personal challenges. Guests share their unique experiences, and we also offer a few little challenges that can help us all thrive in the game of life. My guest today is Chris Donaldson, and when it comes to a challenge, there's nothing quite like trying to drive a motorbike around the world. In 1979, Chris left Belfast on a Moto Guzzi motorbike with the plan of going all the way to Australia. After 2 years, he ended up the other way in Argentina, which is no small feat and has given him a broad and unique view of the world. He attempted the trip again 42 years later and made it to Australia. So he's got lots of cool stories and quite an awesome perspective on life, given his mileage through different countries. I'm also a big fan of cafe racer motorbikes. So we had a pretty cool chat. Enjoy this one, guys.
Being Australian, native culture is very important to me. Aboriginal culture. I love this concept, the traditional ritual of sending the adolescent out into the wilderness to find his own way.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. So how was it for you, firstly, growing up in Belfast, and then what made you decide to embark on your first your first motorbike journey across countries?
I mean, Belfast was a bit of a dive in the 70s and 60s and 70s. The Troubles were kicking off big time. I went to school right in the middle of town. It wasn't actually, none of the family were injured or shot or anything, but our family business was blown up a number of times. You could look at our school windows and see bombs going off various times and bomb scares and so on. It wasn't a great place to be a teenager, really. But of course, when you're a young guy, you didn't really know that because you didn't know anything else when you were young. You only know what you know. But as you get older, teenage years, you start realizing that the rest of the world isn't like that. So I had a drive to get out, and Australia seemed to be a nice place to go. I had a few relations there, and I thought I'd like to spend a year there and maybe stay longer. But for some reason, I decided to go there on a motorbike. And I think it really just, looking back, I know now I wanted to challenge myself. At that stage, I just wanted the excitement of it, probably. But looking back, I wanted to get away from parents, friends, family, associates, school. When you're young, there's so many people have an interest and a lean on what you do and what you think. I wanted to sort of discover myself, I think. So we would like that's where the association was with the Australian Aborigine type idea of, I suppose in the West we have a coming of age road trip story. It's sort of a clique now, but I didn't realize it at the time. And that's really what I wanted to do, is challenge myself.
I think the appealing thing about motorbikes is this sense of freedom.
Yeah, you get a sense of freedom, and you're on your own because obviously you're not in a car, somebody's sitting beside you. So you do get a sense of freedom, the wind, the noise. You're able to sort of step on, step off, and also when you stop somewhere, it's a great tool of getting to know people, because everybody has an interest in motorbikes, whether like yourself, you want to come back to them, or you've had them before, you want to have one, you hate them, you love them. Everybody has an emotion about motorbikes, whether it's good or bad. So it's always a good opening line when you arrive somewhere, on a bike. It's a good way to get to know people. And also there's a great motorcycle community around the world. In the West, anyway, certainly there's great camaraderie between motorcyclists from all over, I found. And even in third world countries, people kids like to see bikes, and a big bike's usually pretty unusual, somewhere like India or Pakistan. So it always gets noticed and gets an opening conversation going.
So was the route you initially took through Europe and across Pakistan and down? How was the trajectory initially?
Well, the original plan, was to drive east through down to Greece, across Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, India, and shipped from India. But then I left in October 79, I got as far as London, and the Ayatollah Khomeini took over the American embassy, and the Islamic Revolution kicked off in Iran. So that sort of pretty much blocked the road east. And it was November, so I thought, well, I can't stay in Europe, so I thought I'll go to South Africa and try and get to Australia maybe through Kenya or something like that. But in those days, it's so easy now to do research on Google. You just put the name of somewhere in, and you can see what's happening, what visa restrictions are, whatever. But all my guidebooks were for Asia and the road east, so sort of basically went south without any notion of what was happening.
Sounds like
Greece.
Sorry, it sounds like you had an ability to pivot when need be.
Yeah, I suppose that's the word for it now. It's just a matter of the only place I could think of that was warm enough to ride a motorbike was Africa in November. So I ended up in Israel. Tried to get out of Israel, couldn't get across the border. So ended up going to Syria and then Jordan, and through to Egypt by boat, and then down across the Sahara. And if you can imagine driving basically a cafe racer across 400 or 500 miles of sand isn't the easiest of journeys. But eventually made it down to South Africa and apartheid, so it was interesting. But it was because of apartheid, it was a bit of a dead end. There was a lot of sanctions on, so I managed to get a job in a yacht race back to Europe, and got my bike shipped to the States. Went up to Canada, around States, down through Central and South America, and ended up in Argentina a year and a half later. So that's why the book's called Going the Wrong Way. So I left to go to Australia and ended up in Argentina. But
at least they both start with the letter A, right?
Yeah. It must have been a bit dyslexic in my youth, you know.
But so I guess that's what I'm getting at, is in terms of you have a plan, right? And then just political climates change, things are happening left, right, and center in different countries, and you either adapt to it and go on, or you turn around and go home.
Yeah. Well, on reflection, looking back in the trip and even during the journey, I realized that not having a destination, in fact, was what made the trip, because it was traveling for the sake of traveling rather than traveling to actually. Usually, when you travel, you're traveling to go somewhere. That's the whole idea of it. You've got a destination, whereas I didn't really have a destination when I was in Africa. I had a sort of notion of to get to South Africa, but really it was just traveling for the sake of traveling, and that's really what brought me back to the sort of, as I say, the Aboriginal idea of just traveling just for the sake of see what happens, see what the day brings, rather than actually trying to get somewhere.
Yeah, that's awesome. And rather than having a list of like tourist spots to tick off, or and being so focused on the outcome or the end result, you just literally exercising that muscle in like being present where you are.
Yeah. In fact, when I was traveling, when I was in trouble and difficult spots, I could think, oh God, I can't wait to get to Cape Town and have a beer, watch the ocean and so on. But actually, by the time when I got there, it was actually nearly a bit of an anticlimax, because I was thinking, well, what am I going to do now? The journey's over. That part of the journey's over. Of where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And it was a bit of a disappointment in a way. All you can do when you reach a destination is think about what the next journey is going to be.
But I guess with the flexibility, if you like somewhere, you can stop and stay there for longer, or if you're not into it, you can move on.
Well, when you're 21, you have that option to do that. As I say, when I did the second part of the journey, 43 years later, it wasn't quite so easy. I've got a family and a job and responsibilities, so I couldn't just disappear for a year and a half. So what happened was I started writing a book when I got back and got so far, and then another guy called Ted Simon wrote a book about driving a motorbike around the world. And I read it. It was a great book. I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to compete with that. So I sort of gave that up, put my journals away, and 40 years later, dug them out again and thought, well, may as well get around to finishing this book. And if Ewan McGregor and these other guys can do it, I see if I can write a book. So I got the book published three years ago, and it's been a bestseller at Amazon quite a few times, a few months. And one of my mates said, well, you never actually got to Australia, why not have another go? So 2 years ago, the two of us set off. I still had the same bike, so I thought, well, if I'm going to do the journey, I might as well try and do it on the same bike. So test myself, to see if I still have what it takes. So we left in 2 weeks legs. So the idea was we'd drive for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, leave the bike somewhere, and then come back and go to work, and come back 2 or 3 months later. So we left. It took us nearly a year and a half to make the journey, but in 6 or 7 different legs. But also COVID to put up with as well, which is a bit of a distraction through Europe anyway. So it was interesting to see how different countries reached that. But one of the problems was I got to Athens, and my mate, whose idea the journey was, decided he didn't want to go any further. He thought it's not for me. So that's a bit annoyed about that. I was stuck in Athens. He talked me into doing the journey, and then went home. So I thought, well, I'm not the sort of guy that stops halfway through something. So I could sort of continue on my own.
Yeah, it's a very different experience traveling with someone and traveling with someone else, especially when you did that first trip completely solo, right? It must have been pretty different to that's kind of a variable of its own, dealing with where the other person's at. And also, like you say, sounds like you developed an ability to be kind of present in a place, but then if you've got someone with you they've got different priorities, different goals, they might be at a different stage. It's a bit of a challenge in itself.
Changes the dynamics all completely, certainly. And if you're used to traveling on your own, you get quite selfish. You just do what you want. You don't have to ask anybody, if it's legal and you can afford it, you do it. So it was, but the other downside was the lack of security. You got somebody else to mind your bike, or if you're going somewhere, if you get in the ball or somewhere, there's 2 of you, you have a bit more security with you. I'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 4 or 5 years ago, a couple of years before that, so I was sort of a bit of a concern about that as well, whether I'd be able to cope with the stresses and strains of my own. But actually, there's something quite relaxing about being on your own on a motorbike. It's you can focus. You've only got one job to do. You've only got the day's journey to worry about. So it's, in a way, it's quite stress free. It seems a bit of a hard to imagine how riding across India or Pakistan could be stress free, but you've only got one thing to worry about. So it's quite different from working in a sort of Western background. You've got all those different things pulling and pushing on you.
Yeah, you're literally just dealing with what's in front of you. That's kind of nice. Trying to overcome the next obstacle.
That's all you got to worry about. Yeah, the responsibility of family and jobs and work. And customers and whatever.
Sounds like there must have been a lot more planning required second time round, as you say, with all the responsibilities. And
there was more planning and more difficulties that way. And I'm certainly older, and if you're riding 12, 14 hours a day, it's much more tiring than it was when you were 21. Think about you could ride a bike all day and go out and party all night, but now I just want to go to bed with a mug of cocoa or something like that.
I love the idea of you dusting off the original bike. I think that's pretty cool. I've watched those Long Way Up and Long Way Down series, and I like those series a lot. But in that last series, they had a deal with Harley Davidson, didn't they? And they used electric prototypes.
They did,
which doesn't have the roar of the end. Like I imagine, I haven't experienced, but I imagine it's a totally different thing when you're on an electric bike.
Well, there's that, but it's probably more the difference, to be honest, is the fact that they had a backup team and a couple of Land Rovers coming behind them and TV crew and whatever. So, to be honest, I mean, not running down what they did is a great story, but it's completely different apart from them going off on a motorbike, it's a completely different story than going on your own somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. When you got a backup team and you can call people in and get the bike sent off to be repaired and back. I mean, and a huge budget. It's
as you say, you're not worrying about breakdowns, not worrying about running out of money or getting robbed. All the things that you worry about being on your own motorbike, they didn't have to worry about. You just had to worry about staying in the middle of the road, I suppose.
On that first trip, what was one of the kind of stranger or funnier things that went down?
Well, the hardest thing probably was the fact that I set off on a 3-4 month trip to Australia, whereas I was away for a year and a half, so the finances were pretty stretched. I did stop and work along the way a bit, but the hardest thing was sort of in Africa, basically living like a native sort of population would, because didn't have the money to stop in a hotel. You'd stay in doll's houses or camp at the side of the road. So it's nice this time being able to afford to stay in a hotel and that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, very different. But as you say, when you've kicked on a bit, the creature comforts
a bit more important.
No, so yeah, I mean, I guess it sounds like when you were young, it was, you know, about breaking away from the past, and I can relate to that. You know, I left Australia for London, and you know, when I got there, I kind of sort of felt like I could carve out my own path without the kind of weight of all the history of where I grew up. Not to reject it or anything, but just like all that noise you're talking about and all that, just to literally break out of that and start to find your own way.
Find your own feet, yeah. I mean, it's a funny thing looking back. When I got there, I'm sort of when I left the first time, I was 21. It was sort of a coming of age trip, as you say. This journey was more of a coming of old age, because if you take life, growing up, you sort of coming of age, start of your working life in your 20s, something. When you get to 65, you're finishing your working life, you're ending up sort of looking at, well, what am I going to do now in my retirement years? So it is a sort of part of another part of my life story, I suppose. And it's not a part of people's life. People think of when you're 20, when you're coming of age, when you're 40, you're having a midlife crisis or whatever. But there's no real sort of term for what happens when you're in your 60s. You're giving up work, your family have left or leaving. It's actually one of the biggest changes of your life that you go through in a way. But yeah, it's sort of forgotten about in a lot of ways. You know, friends have taken early retirement and they end up going out and digging the garden every day and maybe playing golf twice a week. And nearly it's a bit of it's not really what you worked 40 years for, is it? It's sort of going on the scrap heap effectively, you know. So I thought there must be more to it than that. So I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could still do what I did when I was 20 and hopefully continue to do something else like along those lines, rather than, as I say, end up in the back garden for the rest of my life, you know, the back tinkering in the shed, whatever.
Yeah, the journey's ongoing, really, isn't it? It's interesting what you say about that second, call it the later part, the back nine, whatever you want to call it. That's its own thing, and I imagine that comes with a whole different set of challenges relative to where you've been and where you're at, and so it's really cool to keep pushing in a way. Yeah,
well, I think it's important to keep giving yourself challenges to exercise your brain and your mind and your body physically as well. I mean, you know, if you don't use your body, you sort of lose muscle, you lose the ability to do things. But I think your brain works the same way. If you stop thinking, you stop using your brain to challenge yourself, you just lose focus and you just go into, your world becomes so small, you know. I think that's probably what talking to older people have found when they've given up work, they've sort of retired to a village or a street near it, sort of the world becomes small and claustrophobic.
When it could actually expand out.
Which should be, yeah. That's what I see it anyway, hopefully. I'll know more in a few years' time. See how it goes.
Yeah. How has it been to sort of go full circle in a way and return home back to your roots?
Belfast's a different place than it was in the 70s. It's a lot more going on, a lot more of a happening city. It's a bit more positivity. I've still traveled a lot. I lived in Dubai for 8 years. I've lived in Dublin for a few years as well. I've been always sort of moved around a bit, but I suppose your home where you grow up is always a bit of a. You're always looking at this home like yourself. You still talk about yourself as being Australian, even I don't know how long you've been in Germany, but yeah,
10 years, yeah.
yeah, it's still think back to Australia being home.
I'm in a funny kind of limbo land now because I've been away from Australia too long, and I've taken on things from Europe. I'll never be quite German, but I have a German family. But I've obviously picked up things culturally here. You know, it hasn't just been a 2-year stint here. Like I've been raising a family here, so it's very much immersed in building a life here, which is very different to a stopping through. So I get that. Like,
it's not home rather than just you're not visiting.
Exactly. It's
I have a cousin who lives in Germany. She's from the UK originally, and she's brought up her kids as Germans who've been there all their lives, you know. And it's funny, she was saying one of the kids thinks of himself culturally as quite German, whereas the other one thinks of herself culturally as more British still, because they just speak English obviously at home quite a lot, but one of them would speak German all the time, the other one would speak English all the time, you know. So I don't know what with your kids, whether they consider.
Well, my son speaks. He's bilingual, and he switches with my partner and I perfectly. So, it's really classic for me to find myself. I never imagined I would have like a bilingual kind of way of life here. It's pretty cool though.
I suppose one of the things that I did think about when I got to Australia, I mean, I really enjoyed Australia. I was there a few years back as well. I've been there a couple of times, really enjoyed the lifestyle and the culture and so on. And I think the Irish sense of humour and the Irish sort of culture is quite similar to Australian in a lot of ways. I did sort of kind of think if I'd left home, I was supposed to leave in September, but I didn't get my act together in time till October, and then of course the revolution stopped me going there. And I do think, well, if I'd left 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks earlier, I probably would have got through Iran in time, got to Australia when I was 21, stayed there forever. My life could have taken a completely different direction, changed altogether. All for the sake of leaving 2 weeks earlier, you know. So it's amazing how something completely removed from yourself or what you do, what your decision makings, your decisions completely changes your direction of your life.
Absolutely. I've got a lot of Irish friends in Melbourne, and I did think about it a lot because they've all built long-term, you know, lives there. And, you know, I was leaving Melbourne to come to Europe where they'd left. Yeah. And I was always thinking about me sort of returning me going to where they're from and them. But yeah, many Irish friends in Melbourne who just love it.
Yeah, no, it's a good lifestyle.
Yeah, definitely. It's great. What was Dubai like?
Well, Dubai was we really enjoyed Dubai. Went there for a year and ended up staying for 8, but it's quite expensive. We got around that by, I suppose, we'll look back, the journey I made when I was 21 has affected a lot of my different things I've done in life, much more than a period of time should. But as I said, I sailed back from South Africa, spent 5 weeks on a racing yacht. So I got into sailing quite a bit. And we got to Dubai, ended up buying a yacht, a 47-foot yacht to live on. So I lived there on the boat for 6 years, which I couldn't have done if I hadn't had this experience of sailing back from Cape Town. So it's funny that things that happen to you during a trip like that, it makes a big impact in your life even 30, 40 years later, you know.
Do you think you would have lived on the boat if you hadn't done the motorbike trip? No,
I wouldn't have.
No.
I wouldn't have thought of even thinking I'd have the experience to be able to do that. As it was touch and go anyway, but I wouldn't have thought of that. So that was a whole sort of 7 or 8 years in Dubai. I wouldn't have been able to do that, which is a big impact. And my daughter was with us as well. So she's a different person than she would have been if she'd been living here for those influential years of her life as well. So, you know, one little thing that happened in 1979 has altered the whole course of my life and my daughter's life now as well, sort of thing. So yeah, Australia's somewhere now. Obviously the motorbike's still there, so I need to go back and do some more traveling in Australia.
I was going to say, it's kind of fitting that like where it stands now is that the motorbike's in the museum in Australia. That's a nice kind of cap rounding off to the second trip.
Yeah, but as I say, once you finish one trip, then you immediately start thinking about the next one. So the plan is to go back to Australia, take the bike to the States, and maybe finish the circumnavigation of the world on it.
On the same
bike. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, next time I'm home, if I'm traveling up the coast, I'll have to stop in the museum, depending on whether it's still there or.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still there at the moment. Life's getting in the way.
I've considered doing a sort of a trip from here to like Prague or somewhere, but I considered doing it on a 50cc, and staying off the I'm not really interested on the big autobahns and stuff, and it wouldn't have the power. But I think the idea behind the 50 is a little bit about what you're saying in terms of like slowing down and absorbing more, taking more in. It might be frustrating in a way because I just wouldn't have the power, but at the same time, it might help me take more in.
Yeah. Well, certainly I know people have done sort of gone around the world in 250s and smaller. 50's a wee bit small because you put any luggage on it, you're going to be very slow. I would go for a 125, maybe stretch yourself a bit.
Yeah. No, since the initial thought, I'm looking at a 125. Yeah. I need an upgrade on my license. That's all.
I mean, everybody does their trips differently. I met some Australians. They're still on the go. Left Australia to go around the world on motorbikes 8 or 9 years ago, and I picked up 2 dogs, and I doing with the 3 dogs in the back of the motorbikes.
Oh wow!
And they've been going for it was 8 years last year. They're still going. So they're obviously stopped doing it very slowly. With the Moto Guzzi I had, it was quite a quick bike. So if I wanted to do a longer stretch in the road, I could sort of do 400 or 500 miles a day. Or if you want to do a smaller stretch, you can do that as well. So pick the way you want to do it.
What was the most distance you covered in one day?
Probably the biggest distance was driving across Canada. I had a job to go to in North Carolina on the East Coast, so I was in Vancouver. So across Australia across Canada in I think 5 or 6 days, 5.5 days, which is about 3,000 miles. Because I'd lost my passport and I lost my wallet in Vancouver. So I had to get to Ottawa to get a new passport. So just blasted across, which is quite a big journey to make on a motorbike that just driven down Africa.
Yeah, for sure. And
500-600 miles a day for 5 days in a row.
Canada's a beautiful country, though.
Yeah, I'd like to go back. So between that and in Africa and Sudan, there was days we were driven all day and only covered 10 miles across the desert because we're digging and pushing and shoving cars and was in a convoy. Let's say the worst day was, I think we did 10 miles in about 12 hours driving. So we get an idea what the conditions were from that,
Did you ever have any close calls in terms of accidents?
Yeah, I had a few close calls. I mean, usually because of the driving in places like India. I actually got hit by an ice cream wagon, of all things, coming the wrong day down a one-way street. It's dark, disappeared out of the darkness.
Was it playing music?
Not quite. No, it was a rickshaw, motorized rickshaw.
Okay.
So he just clipped the pannier, and I thought that'll be me off. So all these things go through your head in a flash. But the bike went on and stopped, turned around, and the pannier had ripped right off the bike and ended up in the middle of the street. luckily it hadn't opened because all my clothes were in it. So I drove back and he was standing there thinking, what are you doing? I said, what are you doing going down a one-way street the wrong way? And he's, everybody does that in India, there's no rules.
Did he offer you an ice cream or?
No, he didn't. I was a bit too cross probably at that stage.
I was, close guy, close calls. But I was fascinated when I was in Vietnam with, I'm not sure if you went through, Vietnam's an island, but I was fascinated by what people carry on motorbikes there.
Yeah, they carry everything.
Yeah, the first day I saw a pig, like a giant pig ready to be like cooked, but I'm not a massive one. The second day I saw a palm tree, like a giant palm tree on the back. Third day, a pet shop, like fish, all hanging off the back.
Yeah.
The fourth day, an entire family of 5 on the back. And then to cap it off, I was on the motorway in a taxi with my buddy, and we were laughing because a motorbike came past with a fridge on the back.
Yeah.
And we were just laughing at the fridge, but then on the back of the fridge was the daughter like clinging to the back of the fridge.
Yeah.
And so the father or whoever had clearly said, look, if the fridge takes priority, you just got to hold on the back. And she's literally just like hugging it.
I remember in Pakistan, I saw there's a motorbike 125 with obviously a farmer on it, and there's a sheep in front of him. And it looked like the sheep was actually driving the bike. And his wife was in the back holding onto a goat, which is a live goat. So hanging on the side of the motorbike. Sure that. So yeah.
Classic.
Health and safety's out the window completely.
Completely. That's the thing in Vietnam, though. Just it sort of runs like a river. It just kind of. I mean, I'm sure when things happen that it doesn't go well, but if it, when you're crossing the road, you just have to like trust it to go round you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In places like Iran, the traffic lights only affect cars and lorries. Basically, you come to a red light, the cars and lorries stop, but the motorbikes and the bicycles and the people just go straight on. So the traffic crossing the other way, all the cars and lorries are going to cross there. And you think this is going to be a disaster. Everybody's going to crash into these people, but it's like we've got some sort of negative ion or something. They just walk through and everybody seems to miss each other. It's quite weird. It
just works. It just functions.
It just works. People just walk across. Mothers with children on their back, just walking across the road without even looking around. And the trucks miss them and the cars miss them generally. Well, I'm sure a lot of times they don't, but
there's really no set way to do things, is there? And I think if you're going full circle, if you stay in one place, you might just believe that like that's the only way that things. I mean, I just experience it in Germany all the time. Like the language on the autobahn here in terms of going as fast as you want in certain sections.
Yeah.
Whereas in Australia, like, the speed limit's 100 or 110, but the roads are often in poor shape. Whereas here, like the roads are like very good surfaces, and the language on the autobahn allows for that to happen. I guess there's no right or wrong, but just being exposed to both, you sort of question, well, what's the most sensible or what makes the most sense?
Well, funny enough, one of the weirdest things happened to me was we got to Sydney. I got some pictures taken at the ground at the Opera House and under the bridge and so on. And we drove up to meet some guys. I was turning right at a green light. And next thing, there was a siren went off and the police motorbike pulled me in behind. Oh, what's wrong with you? He says, shouldn't have gone through that light. I said, well, it was a green light. He says, yeah, but there was people crossing on the other road. I said, well, they shouldn't have been crossing. I saw them crossing and I went behind them. I missed them. They shouldn't have been crossing. He said, no, they had a green light as well. I said, well, how can they have a green light and I have a green light? He said, well, it's a bit of a thing that Australians do. You're supposed to wait till the little red man goes away or they stop walking. I go, well, that doesn't make sense. He says, yeah, well, I'll let you away with it.
And that was right at the finale after you'd taken
right the end in Sydney, yeah. So
bloody Australian regulations, I tell you, they can really I went through a light.
He got his notebook out. I think he was going to pick me, and then he realized that the bike was from Ireland and I was from Ireland. He was, oh, it's not worth the paperwork, I don't think.
Say, let you off. Yeah, but just one little obstacle to hit at the end. Yeah. Yeah, I went through a light once, and because I had a fever and I was actually just trying to get home, and it's no excuse, but I went through the light on my push bike, and the cops stopped me, and they said, we're going to treat you like a car, and we're going to fine you the same as a car. And I basically said to the cop, like, there's no excuse. I shouldn't have gone through the light, but I'm telling you, I got a fever of like 40 right now, and I'm just trying to get home, and I'm not quite with it. And I think he just looked at me and was like, all right, I'll let you go.
When you're making a mess in front of him.
Yeah, classic. Yeah, no, awesome to. I mean, it's hard to cover such an epic journey in two parts in kind of an hour. But on the show, I like to get guests to offer listeners challenges in any way, shape, or form relative to your experience. Do you have a challenge that you might want to suggest for the listeners?
I suppose challenge to anybody in this sort of my age, it's sort of 60s, middle 60s, you sort of thinking of retiring, is don't just give up on your personal challenges yourself. Just because you're too old for work, or you've given up work, or you've been retired, or you want to retire, just get out and do stuff. Don't stop challenging yourself. Don't stop trying to learn new things. You know, I think there's a big world out there, and it's still a lot to do. And even though you're over the hill, as they say, you know.
It shouldn't really be over there. That's an awesome challenge, by the way. But yeah, it shouldn't be over the hill. It's like with everything you've experienced and everything you've learned, and with all the more reason to go further in whatever way, whatever shape that takes.
Yeah. And for young people as well, I think the internet and social media has taken over a lot of people's lives. They're more interested in watching things than actually doing things. I think for young people, they need to get off the phone and get out and do things rather than living online.
It's a big one too. And it's like if they are on some kind of experience, they're more worried about getting the story than actually just being on the. It's really. Yeah,
I think the worst legacies of COVID has been it's forced a lot of people to do things online, stop going to work, sitting at home or sitting on their computer all day. It's made that a norm rather than a casual or an unusual thing to do. So it's people are more online and stop being physically active than they should be. You know, they need to get out and do it.
It's a massive disconnect, really, which is the irony of it all. So just where can people find your book? The book's called Going the Wrong Way.
Called Going the Wrong Way. It's on my website, which is Chris Donaldson World, chrisdonaldson.world, or on Amazon's probably the easiest way for people internationally. It's on audiobook, it's on Kindle and paperback as well.
For sure. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Nice to be in touch.